Every British monarch since the 16th century has carried a title that sounds almost decorative in the modern world: Defender of the Faith. It's stamped on coins, written into royal proclamations, spoken aloud at every coronation for 500 years. It sounds like ceremonial language, the kind of thing nobody outside a history documentary is supposed to think about twice. In the summer of 2026, that assumption collapsed. A quietly worded update inside one of the monarchy's own official financial documents has triggered a genuine constitutional storm, with a former royal chaplain publicly accusing King Charles III of violating the sacred oath he swore at his own coronation, in front of the Archbishop of Canterbury, God, and the entire watching world. This isn't manufactured outrage. This is a real, ongoing controversy, built on an actual government document, actual quotes from named clergy, and a genuine, unresolved question about how much authority a modern king actually has to redefine his own historic role. Let's go through exactly what happened, and why so many people think it matters far more than a simple wording change. The story starts with the sovereign grant, the annual public funding mechanism that pays for the monarchy's official duties, tied to a percentage of profits from the crown estate. Every year, alongside the financial figures, the royal household publishes a sovereign grant annual report that also describes, in prose, the constitutional role of the reigning monarch. For years, that description was simple and direct, tying the king's spiritual role tightly to the established church. In the report covering the 2025 to 2026 financial year, published in the summer of 2026, that language changed. Where previous editions had described the king in terms directly tied to defending the Christian faith, the new report stated that His Majesty is Supreme Governor of the Church of England and protects the space for faith within the multi-faith nation, adding that he has a special role in bringing communities and faiths together. To be precise about what did and didn't happen, because precision matters enormously in a story like this, the formal legal title, Defender of the Faith, was not removed. It remains part of Charles's official style, proclaimed at his accession and used throughout his 2023 coronation, where he was formally announced as Defender of the Faith. No act of Parliament changed it, and the king's constitutional obligations to the Church of England were not formally altered. What changed was the explanatory language in a single administrative document, a description of how the monarchy characterizes that role in its own public communications, shifting the emphasis from defending one specific faith to protecting space for many. To understand why this argument has so much force behind it, it helps to know where the title actually came from. Defender of the Faith wasn't originally a Protestant title at all. It was first conferred by Pope Leo X in 1521, granted to King Henry VIII in gratitude for a pamphlet Henry wrote defending Catholic doctrine against the early ideas of Martin Luther. The irony, of course, is that Henry went on to break from Rome entirely just over a decade later, founding the Church of England after the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn. Every English and British monarch since, with the sole exception of the Catholic Queen Mary the run during her reign, has carried the title in its Protestant Church of England form, making it one of the oldest continuously used descriptors in the entire British constitutional framework, nearly 500 years old, changing hands and meaning once already at the Reformation, and now facing what critics say is its most significant reinterpretation since. The formal coronation oath itself is worth quoting precisely, because it's the actual legal text at the center of the dispute. At his 2023 coronation, Charles was asked by the Archbishop of Canterbury whether he would maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel, and whether he would maintain the Protestant Reformed religion established by law, along with the settlement of the Church of England and its doctrine, worship, discipline, and government as established in law. Charles answered, "All this I promise to do." That specific wording is the legally binding commitment Scholars like Ashenden argue cannot simply be reworded through the prose of an annual spending report, however administrative that report might otherwise be. That distinction, however, hasn't stopped the backlash from being significant, and it hasn't stopped serious people from arguing that the distinction barely matters in practice. The most vocal critic has been Dr. Gavin Ashenden, who served as chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II for 9 years, from 2008 to 2017, before resigning to speak more freely on matters of faith, and who later left the Church of England to join the Catholic Church in 2019. Ashenden posted a public video calling the change beyond delusionary, and went considerably further in written commentary, describing it as nothing less than a betrayal. What appears to be an adjustment of his coronation oaths is, in fact, a betrayal of his office, of his Christian faith, and that of his subjects, he wrote. He argued that Britain's sovereign is constitutionally and spiritually charged with defending the Christian faith specifically, not promoting religion in general, and warned that treating all religions as equally valid undermines the exclusive claims at the heart of Christian doctrine. In a further escalation, Ashenden raised a question that goes to the heart of the entire controversy: whether the king even has the power to alter the substance of an oath that was never his to unilaterally rewrite in the first place, since the monarchy itself is a creation of Parliament, and the coronation oath traces back to a constitutional settlement agreed in 1688. By that argument, there is no clear constitutional mechanism by which a sitting king can simply redefine his own religious obligations through the wording of a financial report, meaning the change, however administrative it looks on paper, may sit on genuinely uncertain legal ground. Ashenden did not stop at questioning the mechanism. In some of his strongest language yet, he suggested the shift raised questions about whether the king's conduct was sufficiently subversive as to raise questions about his capacity to fulfill the office of king, about as serious an accusation as a former royal chaplain can level at a reigning monarch without directly calling for abdication. Other Christian commentators picked up the same argument in the weeks that followed, framing the change as part of a broader pattern rather than an isolated incident, and pointing to earlier moments in Charles's reign that they argued told the same story. That broader pattern is worth examining on its own, because it didn't start with this single report. Weeks earlier, in the spring of 2026, Charles faced a separate round of criticism for choosing not to issue a traditional Easter message, despite having released one the previous year that explicitly incorporated reflections on Christianity alongside Judaism and Islam. The absence became more notable because it came only 2 months after Charles had extended a Happy Ramadan greeting to Muslims in Britain, a contrast that critics seized on as evidence of a monarch more comfortable publicly marking other faiths' calendars than his own church's holiest day. Buckingham Palace and its defenders pushed back on the framing, noting correctly that Easter messages have never been a fixed mandatory royal tradition, and that Charles's own mother, Queen Elizabeth II, rarely issued them either during her 70-year reign. Still, the timing fed directly into the argument that would explode a few months later with the Sovereign Grant Report, that Charles's personal, long-held interest in interfaith outreach was quietly reshaping the monarchy's public religious identity, one small decision at a time, without ever putting the change to a formal debate. That long-held interest is not new, and it's not really in dispute. Charles has spoken about it publicly for decades. As Prince of Wales, long before his accession, he gave interviews suggesting he might prefer to be seen as defender of faith, dropping the definite article rather than defender of the faith specifically, framing it as a reflection of Britain's genuine religious diversity rather than a rejection of Christianity. What's changed is the context. Those were the private musings of an heir with no actual power to alter anything. He is now the reigning monarch and supreme governor of the Church of England. And critics argue that the same instinct expressed now through an official government-adjacent document rather than a magazine interview, carries entirely different constitutional weight. There is an international dimension to this too, one that predates the current controversy and adds useful context to it. Canada, where Charles also serves as head of state, moved even further and considerably more formally. A change to Canada's Royal Styles and Titles Act, previewed inside a federal budget document, confirmed that King Charles would no longer include the phrase "Defender of the Faith" in his official royal title specifically within Canada. A legislative change, passed through Parliament, rather than a quiet adjustment to explanatory wording. Canadian officials framed it as a reflection of the country's multicultural, multi-faith population, and noted Charles himself had, for years, expressed the view that leading one church wasn't incompatible with respecting other faiths in a diverse society. The Canadian precedent matters here because it shows this exact tension between an ancient, singular religious title and a modern, pluralistic society the monarch is meant to represent, has already been resolved once, formally and legislatively, in one Commonwealth realm. What's happening now in the UK looks similar in spirit, but strikingly different in method. Informal, administrative, and, according to critics like Ashenden, without any comparable parliamentary mandate behind it. Public reaction outside clergy circles has been genuinely mixed, rather than uniformly hostile, which is itself part of the story. Online commentary picked up quickly on the theological complexity the palace's new wording sidesteps. One widely shared response noted bluntly that the king cannot really be defender of the faiths in any coherent sense, since Islam does not accept core Christian claims about Jesus, meaning the two faiths cannot both be simultaneously affirmed as equally true by the same office without some contradiction. Others pushed back just as firmly from the opposite direction, arguing that a monarch reigning over a country where regular church-going has fallen to a small minority of the population, while mosques, gurdwaras, temples, and synagogues serve millions of British citizens, has a practical obligation to describe his role in terms that reflect the country as it actually exists today, not as it existed under Henry VIII. Interfaith organizations, for their part, have generally welcomed the shift in tone, framing it as consistent with the kind of visible inclusivity Charles has practiced throughout his reign, inviting leaders of other faiths to his coronation, and speaking, both as Prince of Wales and as King, about wanting to protect the space in which all beliefs, including Christianity, can be practiced freely. Supporters of the change, and there are plenty within faith communities and among royal commentators, argue this entire controversy is being overstated by a small, vocal, and largely traditionalist religious constituency. They point out, accurately, that the formal title hasn't legally changed, that the king's coronation oath as sworn in 2023 remains the historical and legal record of what he actually promised, and that updating explanatory language in an annual report is a far cry from rewriting constitutional law. Some have framed the shift as simple modernization, an acknowledgement that Britain today includes millions of Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Jews, and people of no faith at all, and that a monarch who visibly makes space for all of them without abandoning his own historic Christian role is arguably fulfilling the spirit of defending faith in a genuinely 21st century Britain rather than betraying it. That's precisely where the real substance of this controversy lives, once you strip away the more inflammatory language on both sides. This is fundamentally a disagreement about what kind of authority a modern king actually has over his own centuries-old role, and who gets to decide when and how that role can evolve. Ashenden's camp argues the coronation oath is a fixed, sacred, legally grounded commitment that cannot be quietly reinterpreted through a financial report's prose, no matter how well-intentioned the underlying goal. The palace's implicit position reflected in its unwillingness to walk the change back despite the criticism, is that describing a role accurately as it's actually practiced isn't the same as rewriting the oath itself, and that a monarch reigning over one of the most religiously diverse countries in Europe has some latitude in how he explains, rather than legally alters, that role to the public. Both positions have real defenders. Neither has been tested in any court, any parliamentary vote, or any formal church tribunal, which is exactly why the disagreement remains unresolved and, for now, likely to keep resurfacing every time the palace publishes another document touching on the king's religious duties. It's worth being clear-eyed about where this fits into the broader picture of Charles's reign, because it doesn't exist in isolation from everything else currently testing his authority. This is a king who has spent much of 2026 navigating an extraordinary run of institutional pressure, from the ongoing criminal investigation into his brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, following an unprecedented arrest earlier in the year, to a National Audit Office review exposing years of undisclosed royal income, to reported internal tension with his son and heir, William, over how firmly and how quickly to handle exactly those kinds of crises. One royal insider, describing William's broader frustration, put it plainly: the future king increasingly wants to focus on what they called the practical business of ruling, and feels his father's attention keeps getting pulled toward personal and legacy-driven concerns instead, at a moment when the institution can least afford the distraction. Charles is also continuing cancer treatment that began in February 2024, a health reality that royal commentators say has visibly shaped how much bandwidth he has left over for managing controversies of any kind, religious or otherwise. Layered onto all of that, a dispute over the theological wording of a financial report might look, on the surface, like the least consequential item on the list. But constitutional scholars and church historians who've weighed in on the defender of the faith controversy make a compelling case that it's actually one of the more structurally significant ones, precisely because it touches something none of the other scandals do: the legal and spiritual basis of the monarchy's authority itself, rather than the personal conduct of the people who hold it. That's the real distinction worth sitting with. Money scandals, family disputes, even criminal investigations into royal relatives are, in a sense, about individuals falling short of the standards the institution claims to uphold. This controversy is different. It's a question about whether the institution itself, through the person currently occupying its most powerful ceremonial office, has the standing to quietly redefine what those standards actually are. Without a vote, without new legislation, and without asking anyone's permission beyond the palace's own communications team. Whether you view that as a king thoughtfully modernizing an outdated formula for a diverse modern Britain, or as a monarch overstepping a line he was never given the authority to move in the first place, the underlying fact is the same either way. For the first time in a very long while, serious people are publicly and specifically questioning whether King Charles has the constitutional standing to do something he's already quietly done. There is no formal resolution in sight. No court case has been filed. No parliamentary motion has been tabled to force a reversal or a clarification. The Church of England's own senior leadership has, so far, avoided direct public confrontation with the palace over the wording, even as commentary continues to build in religious media and among constitutional experts. Some canon lawyers and church historians consulted by religious publications have noted that, strictly speaking, an administrative report cannot override statute or the coronation liturgy regardless of its wording, meaning the practical legal impact of the change may ultimately prove smaller than the rhetorical fight surrounding it. Others counter that constitutional norms in Britain are built as much on precedent and convention as on written law, and that a monarch quietly normalizing new language year after year in the Crown's own official publications is exactly how genuine, lasting shifts in unwritten constitutional understanding have always happened. not through dramatic legislative votes, but through small, repeated redefinitions that eventually become accepted fact simply because no one formally challenged them in time. What's left, for now, is a genuinely open question hanging over an institution that has always relied on the assumption that its most fundamental roles simply aren't up for casual reinterpretation, and a king who, whether by careful design or administrative accident, has just demonstrated that they might be. Whatever comes of it, this is a controversy worth watching closely. Not because it involves scandal or spectacle in the way an arrest or a financial exposé does, but because it cuts directly at the quiet, foundational question every hereditary monarchy eventually has to answer for itself. Who actually owns the meaning of the crown? The person wearing it, or the country it's meant to represent?